Hi, I'm Michael Reed. I'm over 40, and I've lived a life that, on the surface, looked simple and steady. I had a house, a family, a job I thought I loved. Every day felt predictable, and every night I slept knowing I was safe, knowing I was in control. But life has a way of teaching you lessons in the moments you least expect, and my lesson came one ordinary Thursday. I woke up that morning, just like any other. The sun had barely peeked through the curtains, casting soft lines across the bedroom floor. My wife, Anna, was already in the kitchen making coffee, the familiar smell filling the room like a comforting memory I had taken for granted. I kissed my kids goodbye, grabbed my briefcase, and stepped into my car. The city hummed around me, unaware of the storm that was about to hit my life. I arrived at the office and walked down the familiar corridor, nodding at colleagues who barely looked up from their screens. Everything seemed normal. But then, at the entrance to my office, nothing felt normal. My nameplate was gone. My chair was empty, and the faces I had known for years looked at me with a strange mix of pity and avoidance. "Michael, we need to talk," said my assistant, her voice hesitant. Those words, they didn't sound like words. They sounded like a verdict, a sentence, a final judgment. Within the hour, I learned that I had been let go. My position, my career, the thing I had built for 2 decades, had vanished just like that. I walked through the office like a ghost, each step echoing in the empty halls of my certainty. Files I had meticulously organized now seemed meaningless. Plans I had worked on for months were gone. And me? I was left with nothing but questions and a crushing weight of disbelief. I went home that evening in silence. The streets were alive with people heading to dinner, laughing, living their normal lives. And here I was, carrying the silence of my own failure. Weeks passed, and with them came the darkness. I stopped calling my friends. I ignored phone calls. I avoided the mirror because every time I looked at myself, I saw a man who had lost control of his life. I replayed every decision, every misstep, every ignored warning. Why hadn't I seen it coming? Why hadn't I acted sooner? My mind was a storm of regret, and sleep became a stranger. But in that darkness, in the moments when I thought I would crumble completely, a small truth began to take shape. Life doesn't pause for our mistakes. It doesn't wait for us to catch up or fix everything at once. You either learn. I woke up that morning, just like any other. The sun had barely peeked through the curtains, casting soft lines across the bedroom floor. My wife, Anna, was already in the kitchen making coffee, the familiar smell filling the room like a comforting memory I had taken for granted. I kissed my kids goodbye, grabbed my briefcase, and stepped into my car. The city hummed around me, unaware of the storm that was about to hit my life. I arrived at the office and walked down the familiar corridor, nodding at colleagues who barely looked up from their screens. Everything seemed normal. But then, at the entrance to my office, nothing felt normal. My nameplate was gone. My chair was empty, and the faces I had known for years looked at me with a strange mix of pity and avoidance. "Michael, we need to talk," said my assistant, her voice hesitant. Those words, they didn't sound like words. They sounded like a verdict, a sentence, a final judgment. Within the hour, I learned that I had been let go. My position, my career, the thing I had built for 2 decades, had vanished just like that. I walked through the office like a ghost, each step echoing in the empty halls of my certainty. Files I had meticulously organized now seemed meaningless. Plans I had worked on for months were gone. And me? I was left with nothing but questions and a crushing weight of disbelief. I went home that evening in silence. The streets were alive with people heading to dinner, laughing, living their normal lives. And here I was, carrying the silence of my own failure. Weeks passed, and with them came the darkness. I stopped calling my friends. I ignored phone calls. I avoided the mirror because every time I looked at myself, I saw a man who had lost control of his life. I replayed every decision, every misstep, every ignored warning. Why hadn't I seen it coming? Why hadn't I acted sooner? My mind was a storm of regret, and sleep became a stranger. But in that darkness, in the moments when I thought I would crumble completely, a small truth began to take shape. Life doesn't pause for our mistakes. It doesn't wait for us to catch up or fix everything at once. You either learn or you break. One night, I sat alone in the quiet of my living room. The children were asleep, Anna was resting, and for the first time, I allowed myself to see the possibility of a path forward. It was not easy. It was not quick, but I began to plan. I wrote down every goal, every step I needed to regain a sense of control. Small victories at first, a new resume, a short run to clear my mind, a phone call to an old friend. Every day I rebuilt a piece of myself, and slowly I began to understand something crucial. Losing everything doesn't mean losing yourself. You can rise from the ashes if you are willing to face the truth, to confront your failures, and to work tirelessly for what you want to become. Life had tested me. It had stripped me of my certainty and my pride. But in return, it gave me something I had never fully appreciated, the chance to see who I truly was. And that is why I tell these stories. Because we all have days when we lose everything, and we all have lessons that must be learned. My hope is that by sharing my experiences, you can see that even in our darkest hours, there is a way forward. This is the first story I share with you on this channel. Stories of mistakes, betrayal, redemption, and life's unexpected turns. I invite you to join me, because every life has a story worth telling, and sometimes we all need to hear someone else's truth to find our own.
I woke up every morning with a weight on my chest. Sleep was shallow, broken, and the air in the apartment felt heavy. The kids were already running around, but I couldn't feel the joy in their laughter. Every step reminded me of the emptiness that now occupied my life. "Dad, are you coming to play with us today?" my youngest asked, his eyes shining bright. I forced a smile, but it was hollow. "In a moment, son. I just need a little time," I replied, feeling a pang of guilt squeeze my heart. I spent hours looking through old photos, journals, and emails, reminders of who I was and who I had stopped being. Every document, every page from the past was a bell of anxiety, reminding me that control had vanished. I often sat in the dark on the kitchen chair, hands on my face, thinking, "It's all my fault. I didn't see it coming. I didn't protect myself. I didn't notice the signs that were right in front of me." These thoughts were relentless. Every minor detail from the past now seemed like a huge mistake. Friends called less frequently, colleagues avoided me, and my family, though supportive, could not restore the world I had built for years. I began to lose my appetite. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner became a formality. Things I once loved, books, music, morning runs, now felt meaningless. One evening, my old friend Thomas knocked on the door. His appearance was unexpected. "Michael, it's been a while. How are you, brother?" he asked, with a light smile that barely hid his concern. I couldn't answer immediately. The words got stuck in my throat. Everything is gone, Thomas. I lost my job, my plan, my future. I feel worthless, I finally said. Thomas was silent for a few seconds, looking at me with a seriousness that felt like judgment. Then he said, "Listen, Michael, life doesn't end when everything seems lost. Maybe you just don't see the chance that's already there. I know you can rebuild, but only if you take the first step." Those words became a small ray of light in my darkness. They didn't instantly give me hope, but they reminded me that I could still change something. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. The fresh morning air flowed through the open window, and I felt the first flicker of control. I began keeping a journal. Every entry was a small attempt to understand what had happened and what I could do to move forward. Today, I ran 3 kilometers. My mind feels clearer than yesterday. Today, I'm not just surviving, I'm taking the first step forward. Small actions, running, reading, writing down thoughts, began giving me a sense of personal power. Each day, I added a little more, reconnecting with old contacts, reviving relationships, preparing for a new job. After a few weeks, I felt change. Although the past still weighed on my shoulders, I felt human again, capable of making decisions. I returned to friends, explored new opportunities, even small projects that once seemed impossible. I realized something crucial. True strength isn't about avoiding loss. It's about learning to rebuild after it. Losing everything and surviving, it's not the end. It's a lesson that can become the beginning of a new life. I learned to value every moment, every little thing I once took for granted. And perhaps, through loss, I became stronger than ever before.
The days following my confrontation with Thomas were the hardest. I woke each morning feeling like a man walking on broken glass, cautious, unsure of what steps to take. But that night's conversation had planted a seed, a faint spark that whispered, "You still have a choice." I started small. Every morning, before the rest of the world awoke, I would sit at my kitchen table, notebook in hand, and write. I wrote lists, plans, goals, mistakes, regrets. The pen became my anchor in a world that had gone adrift. "Step 1, I whispered to myself one morning, staring at the words in my notebook. Reach out to at least one old contact today. I felt absurdly nervous dialing the phone. The first few rings seemed to echo in a canyon, mocking me. And then a familiar voice answered. "Michael, is that you?" It was Susan, a former colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. Her voice was warm, tinged with surprise, but friendly. "Hey, Susan, I know it's been a while, but I could use some advice, a bit of guidance," I stammered. She laughed softly. "Michael, come on, you're always asking questions. Let's meet for coffee tomorrow. It'll be like old times." And just like that, the first real thread of connection was restored. The next few weeks weren't smooth. Every attempt to regain control felt like climbing a steep cliff in thick fog. I applied for jobs, sent emails, made calls, and often got nothing but silence or rejection. Each no was a sting, a reminder of how far I had fallen. Maybe I'm not cut out for this anymore, I thought one night, staring at my reflection in the dark bathroom mirror. But then I remembered Thomas's words. Life doesn't end when everything seems lost. And so I refused to give up. Every setback became a lesson. I learned to adjust my approach, to present myself differently, to highlight strengths I had ignored for too long. Slowly, momentum started to build. I landed a freelance consulting gig. Nothing glamorous, but it was mine. The first paycheck I received after months of uncertainty felt like a small triumph, a tangible proof that I was capable of rebuilding. "This is it," I whispered to myself, counting the bills. "It's a start, a small one, but a start nonetheless." The work was challenging, demanding patience and focus I hadn't exercised in months, but it reminded me of who I was, someone capable, someone who could take control even after losing everything. During this period, I also started reconnecting with my family on a deeper level. Before, life had been too busy, too distracted. Now, every conversation, every meal, every laugh with my children felt precious. "Dad, can you read me a story tonight?" my youngest asked one evening. I nodded, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in months. "Of course, buddy. Tonight we'll read too," I said, smiling genuinely this time. Anna noticed the change too. Our conversations became longer, more meaningful. She no longer just asked about the day. She shared fears, hopes, and even small frustrations. I realized that through the process of losing everything, I had begun to rebuild relationships I had neglected. Despite these small victories, the inner demons never fully disappeared. Some nights, the weight of the past threatened to pull me back into despair. I would lie awake replaying every misstep, imagining every way I could have prevented the collapse. I should have seen it coming. I should have been stronger. But now, instead of letting those thoughts consume me, I observed them. I let them pass through like clouds, reminding myself that they were lessons, not chains. I also started to reflect on my own resilience. For the first time in months, I recognized that surviving the loss of everything had already made me stronger. I had faced fear, uncertainty, and despair, and I was still standing. One afternoon, while walking through a quiet street in the city, I noticed a small "Help Wanted" sign in the window of a modest office. Something about it caught my attention. Perhaps it was desperation, perhaps curiosity. I went inside and spoke to the manager. "We're looking for someone to consult on project management. It's part-time, flexible hours," she explained. I think I can help," I said cautiously. By the end of the week, I was officially hired. It wasn't my old high-paying job, but it was a lifeline, and more importantly, it was a bridge back to confidence. As weeks turned into months, I realized that the process of rebuilding was teaching me something invaluable. Losing everything had stripped away illusions of control, comfort, and predictability. But in that emptiness, I discovered resilience, focus, and gratitude. Life isn't about avoiding loss, I told myself one evening, watching the sunset. It's about learning to rise after it happens. I became more patient, more reflective. I appreciated small victories, daily routines, and honest conversations. I learned to forgive myself for past mistakes and to approach the future with cautious optimism. By the time the first year after the loss passed, I had rebuilt much more than I expected. My work life was stabilizing, my family bonds were stronger than ever, and I felt a clarity that had been missing for years. "I may have lost everything once," I whispered as I watched my children play in the park. "But I have gained something far more precious, the knowledge that I can survive, adapt, and grow no matter what life throws at me." And that's why I tell my stories, to share the lessons, the heartbreak, and the hope that even in the darkest times, there's a path forward. Months had passed since I first lost everything. My freelance work was stable, my family relationships were stronger, and I had regained a small but significant measure of confidence. Yet deep inside, I still felt an emptiness, a question lingering like a shadow. Am I truly free or just surviving? One afternoon, while walking through the city, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd, someone I hadn't expected to see. "Michael?" a voice called out. I turned to see Claire, a former business partner. She had been instrumental in my previous career, but after my downfall, we had drifted apart. Her eyes reflected surprise, concern, and something else I couldn't immediately place. "Claire, it's been a long time," I said cautiously. She smiled faintly. "Too long. Listen, Michael, I've been watching how you've handled everything, and I think you're ready for something bigger, something meaningful." Her words ignited a spark I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't about wealth or status, it was about purpose. Claire invited me to join a new project, a community initiative to help people rebuild after personal crises. Initially, I hesitated. I had been burned before, and the fear of failure still lingered. But then I thought about the months I had endured, the despair, the slow rebuilding, the lessons I had learned, and I realized this was exactly what I needed, not to return to my old life, but to create something new, something that mattered beyond myself. "I'm in," I said finally. That decision marked the true beginning of my redemption. The project wasn't easy. There were obstacles at every turn, funding issues, skeptical participants, logistical challenges. Each setback reminded me of past failures. Sometimes I wanted to quit. "I can't do this," I admitted to Claire one night, exhausted and frustrated. She looked at me with unwavering calm. "Michael, remember the first time you picked yourself up after losing everything? You survived then. You can do it again. But this time, it's not just about you." Her words forced me to confront my old fears and embrace the responsibility that came with growth. I realized that true transformation isn't about avoiding fear, it's about acting despite it. Slowly, our efforts began to show results. People who had lost jobs, relationships, or hope found guidance and support through the program. Seeing them regain confidence, rebuild lives, and smile again was more powerful than any paycheck I had ever earned. This is what I was missing, I told myself one evening, watching a participant finally achieve a milestone. Purpose, connection, meaning. It dawned on me that losing everything had not been the end of my story. It had been preparation. I had been stripped down, tested, and rebuilt so I could contribute something truly lasting. During this period, I also reconnected with old friends and colleagues. Some had doubted me, some had abandoned me, but many returned as my allies and supporters. The friendships I nurtured now were deeper, forged in the fire of hardship. Anna and I grew closer, not out of obligation, but through shared understanding and renewed love. The children saw a father who had faltered, but had learned to rise stronger, and that, I hoped, was a lesson they would carry for the rest of their lives. I began to realize that success was no longer about titles, money, or recognition. Success was resilience, empathy, and the courage to keep moving forward despite everything. One evening, I stood on the balcony, overlooking the city as the sun set in streaks of orange and gold. The chaos, fear, and despair of the past year felt distant now, like shadows fading with the light. "I lost everything," I whispered to myself, "and I found myself in the process." I understood at that moment that life's greatest trials often bring its greatest rewards. Loss taught me humility, patience,
gratitude, and courage. I had faced the void, and on the other side discovered a stronger, wiser version of myself. This story isn't just about me, it's about all of us, about how life can strip us bare, leaving only pain and uncertainty. But it's also about the power we each hold to rise, to rebuild, and to create meaning from chaos. Every loss carries a lesson. Every ending is the beginning of something new. And every life has a story worth telling, even when we think we have nothing left. I share this story with you because I want you to know that even in the darkest hours, there is a way forward. The process is painful, slow, and at times terrifying, but it is possible. As I look back now, I see that losing everything was not the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was the event that reshaped my life, forced me to confront myself, and ultimately led me to a place of strength and purpose I could never have imagined. I am Michael Reed. I have fallen, I have lost, I have been broken, and I have risen. This is my story, and it's only the beginning.